The calculus teacher jokingly pointed at the janitor in front of the class, but when the man quietly approached the board and solved the problem better than anyone anticipated, it didn't just quiet the room, it completely changed how the whole school viewed him. It was fourth period on a Thursday at Eisenberg High in Elkhart, Indiana, the kind of day when students checked the clock more often than the board. Mr. Braddock, the school's calculus teacher, was known for his sharp tongue, impatience, and quick sarcasm. He wasn't particularly liked, but he wasn't hated either, just tolerated. The classroom felt stale, equations covered the whiteboard, the air smelled faintly of eraser dust and worn sneakers, phones were hidden beneath desks, some students pretended to pay attention, others gazed out the window. Then something shifted the atmosphere like a sudden gust. As Mr. Braddock wrote another derivative on the board, a soft squeak echoed from the hallway. The janitor was nearby, methodically mopping outside with his usual slow, steady rhythm. Braddock paused mid-sentence, glanced at the door, and cracked a half-smile. Without warning, he turned to the class and pointed toward the hallway. "Well, look who's here, Mr. Dorsey. Tell me, do you think you can solve this one?" He tapped the board with the back of his marker, like issuing a challenge on a game show. Laughter broke out, not loud, but the kind that made you shift uncomfortably in your seat, unsure if it was appropriate. Braddock smirked again. "Come on, Lamar, you always look like you've got something on your mind." Lamar Dorsey, the 52-year-old janitor, stood in the hallway holding his mop. He wore the same faded forest green uniform he always did, with L. Dorsey stitched over the chest pocket. He didn't blink or flinch. He simply looked into the room. Slowly he stepped inside. He leaned the mop against the wall. Some students sat up straighter. They wondered if he'd say something witty, make a joke, or just walk away. But he didn't. Instead, Lamar calmly walked to the front and asked, "You mind?" Gesturing to the board, Braddock raised his eyebrows. "Be my guest." A few phones quietly slid out of backpacks. One girl whispered, "Is he serious?" No one stopped Lamar. He picked up the marker, studied the equation, and paused, not hesitating, but thinking deeply, like someone reading a familiar map. He squinted just slightly, then began writing. No showmanship, no flair, just deliberate strokes, one line after another. The room fell eerily silent. The only sounds were the marker on the whiteboard and a chair creaking as someone leaned forward. Mr. Braddock crossed his arms, watching closely. His expression stayed the same, but his jaw tightened. Lamar explained each step out loud, his voice low and patient. "See this? Here's a chain rule problem, but the trick is recognizing the inner function first. Once you isolate that, it becomes a lot cleaner." He moved like he'd done this before, not just solving the problem, but teaching it. His tone wasn't showy or smug. He explained simply and clearly, like he'd spent more time teaching than mopping. When he finished, he capped the marker and stepped back. The board was covered with neat, well-organized work. He turned to Braddock, then to the class. "That's one way to do it," he said. For a moment, no one moved. A junior in the back whispered, "He got it right." Mr. Braddock didn't say a word at first. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The silence grew heavier than any joke he might have made. Lamar nodded politely and walked back to the door. He picked up his mop. No applause, no boast, just quiet confidence, like he hadn't just flipped the room upside down. As Lamar reached for the chalk, nobody expected what came next. No one moved for a full 10 seconds. It felt like the class had been pulled out of a dream and dropped into reality. That kind of moment doesn't belong in a high school classroom. Lamar Dorsey, Mr. Dorsey, as they always called him in passing, was halfway out the door when someone finally said it out loud. Wait, he just did that in his head. It was Wes Hanley, a senior in the front row who rarely spoke unless grades were involved. He wasn't joking. His eyes were wide with disbelief as he glanced back at the board, as if the answer might have somehow changed. After a brief pause, Braddock finally spoke, his voice flat and tinged with irritation. "Well, he got the right answer, he said, but the usual sarcasm was missing. Instead, there was something else, confusion, or maybe even discomfort." Lamar looked back at the class. "I spent a lot of time with numbers, a long time ago," he said with a small shrug. "They never really left me." A few students chuckled, not at him this time, but because the tension in the room was finally breaking. Lamar didn't wait for a response. With his mop in hand, his shoes squeaking softly, he quietly walked down the hallway as if nothing had happened, like he hadn't just solved a college-level calculus problem in under 3 minutes without even using a calculator. That's when the phones came out. Someone had recorded the entire thing. Carly Benson, a junior sitting in the 3rd row, and she was already editing the video before the bell rang. Between classes, it was all anyone could talk about. "Did you see Mr. Dorsey?" Braddock's face, man, he looked like someone unplugged him. Whispered one student. "Where'd he learn that stuff? I thought he just cleaned floors by lunch." The video quickly spread, appearing on TikTok and then Instagram. It was unpolished, a shaky shot focusing on Lamar's hands moving across the board, while a voice whispered in the background, "Yo, he's solving it." The caption read, "Our janitor just schooled the calculus teacher." Some laughed, others stared, but the buzz only grew. In the teacher's lounge, the chatter wasn't any quieter. "You're telling me he did a full derivative chain rule problem in his head?" asked Miss Lynn, the physics teacher, mid-bite of her sandwich, having stopped chewing. "He did," muttered Mr. Crane, the English teacher. No notes, no pause. It was like muscle memory. Braddock sat at the corner table pretending to grade papers, silent, but Principal Everett spoke up. "He's been here 6 years, and no one ever mentioned he had an academic background." Heads shook around the room. Nobody really knew much about Lamar. He came early, left late. Floors were always spotless, light bulbs replaced within a day. The man worked quietly behind the scenes, but now he wasn't just the man with the mop. Back in the hallway, a group of students gathered outside the janitor's closet, not to complain or ask for supplies, but simply to talk. 112-year old kid clutching his geometry book asked, "Do you tutor, Mr. Dorsey?" Lamar blinked. "I haven't in a long time." "You should," the kid said. Lamar chuckled. A warm sound, not dismissive, just pleasantly surprised. The next day during 3rd period, Braddock's attitude had changed. No jokes, no random calls on students. He taught with eyes fixed on the board, his voice quieter than usual. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone noticed. After class, Wes approached him. "Mr. Braddock, that thing with Mr. Dorsey yesterday, he used the same method you showed us last week. The chain rule, right?" Braddock nodded once. "Correct. Only he explained it better." Braddock didn't respond further, but what truly surprised everyone wasn't the answer itself. It was what Lamar said afterward. Lamar Dorsey never intended to cause a scene. He never liked being the center of attention, not since he was young. So when students started waiting outside the maintenance closet just to talk, or teachers gave him long looks in the halls, he felt unsettled. He kept his head down, continuing his usual tasks, refilling paper towels, fixing leaky faucets in the boys' locker room, wiping down cafeteria tables. But he sensed a change, a shift in how people saw him, trying to fit him into a new image they hadn't expected. It wasn't just curiosity. It was confusion, respect, maybe even regret, and it made him uneasy. That afternoon, Principal Everett asked him to stop by the front office. Lamar walked in, still wearing his gloves and a slightly damp uniform from cleaning beneath the cafeteria sinks. He removed his cap in respect. Everett leaned forward, hands clasped. "Lamar, can I ask you something?" Do you have a background in education or engineering? Lamar hesitated, looking down as if brushing off dust from a forgotten part of himself he hadn't touched in years. I went to Purdue, he said quietly, mechanical engineering, full ride. The principal leaned back, eyebrows raised. Are you serious? Lamar nodded. I had plans. Things got complicated. For the first time in a long while, he told his story. Growing up in Gary, Indiana, a smart kid. He had always been fascinated by how things worked. Motors, pulleys, anything he could dismantle and reassemble. His mother, Estelle, raised him and his two sisters alone, working overtime at a textile plant, yet still managing to read to them every night. She believed in education as the only way out, often saying, "Books first, always. The world will try to shut the door, but if you bring your own key, they can't stop you." Lamar earned that key valedictorian, state science fair winner, and then the scholarship to Purdue. By his freshman year, he was already tutoring classmates. Professors noticed his name on attendance sheets and paid attention. But sophomore year, a call changed everything. His mother had collapsed at work. Doctors diagnosed late, stage cancer. When Lamar arrived at the hospital, she was barely conscious. "I can handle this," she whispered. "Don't come home." He didn't listen. He took a semester off, then another. He took whatever jobs he could, warehouse work, night shifts at a grocery store, anything to pay bills. Classes faded into the background, as did the dream. By the time his mother passed, everything was scattered. He had no home to return to, no money to finish his degree, and no guidance counselor checking on him. "I kept thinking I'd get back to school," Lamar told Everett, "but one thing led to another. Life doesn't wait for you." The principal sat quietly. The story was heavy, not dramatic, just real. The kind of life you don't hear about unless you ask. Back home, Lamar kept his transcripts in a box under his bed, along with a worn Purdue sweatshirt, an old calculator, and a photo of him and his mom on orientation day. He never touched it, but never threw it away. For now, all of it was being dragged back into the light. That evening, he sat on the back steps of his small apartment complex. The sky was dim and quiet, with only the distant hum of traffic. He sipped tea from a metal thermos, staring ahead. He hadn't thought about calculus in years, not since the last tutoring gig he took before dropping out. Now, it returned like an old friend knocking at his door, but one decision had derailed everything he'd worked so hard for. In college, Lamar promised himself he'd take a short break, get his family back on track, then finish strong. But life doesn't bend to plans, especially those built on hope alone. After his mother died, Lamar returned to Gary, trying to piece things together. His sisters were still in high school, barely getting by. Bills piled up, the landlord wanted rent. No one from Purdue called asking where he'd gone. He took any jobs he could find: stockroom loader, janitor at a strip mall, overnight security at a shipping yard. Anything that paid enough to keep the lights on. School drifted further and further into the rear-view mirror. At first, he called the university occasionally, asking about reapplying and transferring credits. They'd send forms. He'd fill them out but never mail them. Something always got in the way. Then came the breaking point. Late November, a man named Frank Booker, who owned a flooring company in South Bend, offered Lamar steady work. "You're sharp," he said. "Don't waste your time pushing brooms. I'll train you myself." Lamar had hope again, a real shot. But the day before he was to start, his youngest sister, Alana, got into a fight at school. A stupid argument that escalated. She broke someone's nose and they threatened to expel her. Lamar had to be there. No one else would show up for her. So he missed his first day on the job. Frank gave the position to someone else, and that was it. A door that could have opened slammed shut. After that, Lamar stopped chasing dreams and started chasing stability. Years blurred, town to town, job to job. He never had a record or got into trouble. He just survived quietly. By the time he arrived in Elkhart in his early 40s, he wasn't seeking a fresh start, just a steady paycheck. The school district offered benefits, summers were quiet, and he accepted the janitor position without hesitation. He liked it in its own way, predictable, clean work. Students left him alone, teachers smiled politely. He didn't expect friendship or connection. He didn't need it. He kept his head down, cleaned up messes, and left before the last bell rang. But numbers never left him. Sometimes, passing a math class, he'd glance at the board, see a formula, and solve it in his head like muscle memory. A part of him that stayed sharp even when everything else was buried in routine. He'd go home, make himself a quiet dinner, grilled fish and brown rice, perhaps some carrots on his plate, and flipping through an old engineering textbook he kept hidden behind the cereal boxes, just to check if he still had the skill. And he always did, it just hadn't been necessary to show it until Mr. Braddock called him out that day. Now things were changing, not only at school but within himself. He thought about the students who waited outside his supply closet, eager with questions. He remembered Wes Hanley dropping by earlier that morning, holding a folded piece of paper, saying, "Mr. Dorsey, I tried to solve this problem. Can you check it for me?" Lamar patiently and gently explained where Wes had gone wrong, without making him feel small. When Wes finally grasped it, his smile wasn't just pride. It was connection. Moments like that linger, but not everyone welcomed the change. Braddock, for one, had gone silent. Too silent. Both students and faculty noticed. Being shown up in front of his class by a man he'd barely noticed before unsettled him. He didn't lash out, but his responses grew terse, his patience thin. Whenever Lamar's name came up in the lounge, Braddock quickly changed the subject. He wasn't used to being overshadowed, especially by someone previously invisible to him. Yet, life had one more twist in store, and it brought Braddock right back to math. The video didn't just circulate at Eisenberg High, it spread beyond. Initially, a local student page shared it with the caption, "When your janitor turns out to be smarter than your teacher." By the weekend, it reached a regional education forum and had crossed state lines. Online viewers were amazed, not mocking Lamar but genuinely impressed. Comments read, "This man explained it clearer than my college professor. Someone get him a classroom and a chalkboard, not a mop. Proof you never know someone's story." By Monday morning, Lamar was unaware of any of this. Social media wasn't his world. He still used a flip phone. Arriving at work, he did what he always did first. Fixed a jammed paper towel dispenser in the girls' restroom. But something felt different. Teachers paused their chats as he passed by. Students nodded, not out of obligation but with newfound respect. A few even smiled as if seeing him for the first time. "Hey, Mr. Dorsey," a girl called out near the library. "You're kind of famous now." Lamar chuckled softly. "Don't believe everything you read," he replied. Turning the corner, Wes Hanley waited with two other students. One held a calculus book open to a problem highlighted in pink. "Would you mind going through this with us?" Wes asked. Lamar glanced around, puzzled. "You have a free period. We made time." Just like that, in a hallway lined with lockers and science fair posters, Lamar sat down on the floor with three teenagers and walked them through a multivariable equation, step by step, line by line. He wasn't lecturing, he was engaging. It wasn't loud or flashy, but something important was unfolding. Down the hall, someone recorded the session. Lamar never knew. He wouldn't have liked it. Back at the office, Principal Everett was on the phone with a local school board member. "Yes, that's right. Lamar Dorsey has been with us 6 years. No, he's not faculty, he's a custodian." He paused to listen. "I wouldn't call it unorthodox, more like overlooked." Meanwhile, in the teacher's lounge, Braddock opened an email forwarded by a parent. It contained a link to the now viral video. No commentary, no subject, just the link and the words, "Thought you'd want to see this." He closed the laptop without watching. That afternoon, Everett called Lamar back to the office and offered him a seat. Lamar stayed standing. "I've got a request from the board," the principal said. "They want to know if you'd be interested in running an after-school tutoring program. Small group, voluntary, just a trial." Lamar didn't respond immediately. "Of course you'd be paid," Everett added. "It's not about replacing your current role, just adding to it, sharing what you clearly still know." Lamar looked down at his hands, calloused, clean, worn. "I haven't taught in a long time," he said quietly. "You haven't stopped knowing," Everett replied. Lamar looked up, sensing no pressure, just a simple invitation. "I'll think about it." That night, he pulled out the old cardboard box from beneath his bed, the one holding the Padua sweatshirt, transcripts, and orientation photo. He hadn't touched it in years. Now, he spread everything out on the table. The paper was slightly yellowed, its edges curling, but the words remained intact. "That's the thing about knowledge. It doesn't disappear. It waits." Lamar didn't need to go viral or worry about views or comments. What mattered was knowing he could still make a difference, and that stirred something inside him. Yet, while many were impressed, not everyone welcomed the growing attention he was receiving. As Lamar gained recognition, the atmosphere at school began to change. The students were the first to notice. Those who once passed him without a glance now stopped to greet him, and some even asked for help with homework between classes. By the end of the second week, a small group of students had unofficially formed what they called the Dorsey Sessions. They gathered in the library after school, notebooks open and heads bent, listening as Lamar explained concepts with a clarity no one had expected but everyone respected. Then came the teachers. Most offered support. Miss Lynn, the physics teacher, was the first to visit the library and observe Lamar working with the students. "You've got a gift," she said quietly, and not just with numbers. But not everyone was pleased. Mr. Braddock hadn't spoken about Lamar since that day. In the teacher's lounge, he acted like nothing had changed, but his bitterness was evident in his silence. His sentences grew terse. He avoided Lamar's gaze and never mentioned calculus. When a parent-teacher meeting brought up Lamar's growing influence, Braddock commented, "It's good they're interested in math, but let's make sure we don't confuse instruction with inspiration." Though polite on the surface, the tone behind it was unmistakable to everyone. The principal didn't let it slide. One morning, he called Braddock into his office and spoke plainly. "I know it stung," Everett said, "but Lamar didn't embarrass you. He inspired them." Braddock shifted uncomfortably. "He's not qualified," he said. "He's more educated than we thought, and more importantly, he's reaching students in ways none of us have." Braddock opened his mouth but had nothing more to say. Meanwhile, Lamar stuck to his routine. He never asked for a title or special treatment. When the principal offered a modest stipend to keep the tutoring sessions going, Lamar accepted, not for the money, but because it felt right. He began carrying a small binder filled with problem sets, blank worksheets, and handwritten notes. During breaks, he would sit quietly in a corner of the cafeteria, jotting down formulas from memory, occasionally nodding at students who called out, "Hey, Mr. D." One afternoon, Carly, the student who had filmed the original clip, caught up with him by the vending machines. "Did you ever want to be a teacher?" she asked. Lamar paused before answering. "I wanted to build things first, maybe teach later, but life had other plans." She smiled, handing him a fresh mechanical pencil. "Well, I think you're doing both now." He smiled back, grateful, but amid the positive changes, tension simmered. Some parents began calling the school. Most were supportive, but an anonymous complaint landed on the school board. Is it appropriate for a janitor to tutor students? Is he certified? Has he been background checked for instruction? Everett addressed it swiftly. He's an employee of the district. He has done nothing wrong, and if there were genuine concerns, they would have come to me directly. He never told Lamar about the complaint. Still, Lamar sensed something in the air, not resentment exactly, but resistance. As if some people didn't quite know where to place him now that he wasn't just background noise. Then one afternoon, Braddock did the unexpected. He quietly entered the library during one of Lamar's tutoring sessions and watched from afar as Lamar explained integrals to 4 students. After about 10 minutes, he stepped forward. "Mind if I sit in?" Braddock asked. Lamar looked up, expression steady, and nodded toward a chair. "Long as you don't mind learning something." The students chuckled softly, easing the tension. Braddock smirked, for once not in malice. They sat together that day, spoke little, but it was a beginning. Lamar wasn't interested in titles. He had something else in mind. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. Standing at the whiteboard in the library, surrounded by students, it was never about redemption or revenge. He wasn't trying to impress anyone or be remembered. He was simply showing up for them, the kids who reminded him of the boy he once was. Every Tuesday and Thursday, right after the final bell. That corner of the library buzzed with chatter, curious questions, scribbled notes, and died focus as Lamar patiently guided students through math problems they once found terrifying. It wasn't that he had every solution, it was the way he convinced them they could figure it out themselves. That's what made an impact. There was Isaiah, the freshman who almost flunked algebra last term, now confidently solving quadratic equations without breaking a sweat. And Tasha, who once despised math, now led weekend study sessions for her younger cousins using Lamar's notes. He never stood in front of the class like a typical teacher. Instead, he sat beside the students, spoke with them, and posed questions before responding to theirs. Slowly, more teachers began stopping by not to supervise, but to observe how he worked his magic. Miss Lynn even asked if she could borrow some of his teaching methods for her lessons. Coach Rivera wondered if Lamar might help launch a summer prep group for incoming freshmen. Even Braddock reserved Braddock began to visit more regularly. Not daily, but often enough to offer a problem or two, and eventually some quiet words of encouragement to the kids. The usual sharpness in his voice softened over time. One day, after a session wrapped up and the students had gone, Braddock hung back. Staring at the whiteboard, he said, "I used to think this job gave me importance, that teaching gave me power. Lamar didn't say a word, but you've reminded me what it's truly about, just showing up and making it count." Lamar nodded gently. "We all lose our way sometimes." He didn't carry grudges. He didn't have to. A month later, Principal Everett called Lamar in. There was a new proposal on the table. Formalize his tutoring sessions into a non-credit elective course the following semester, not for grades, but for growth. "We'll need to get through some red tape," Everett warned, "but if you're open to it." Lamar smiled and shook his head. "Thank you," he said, "but I'm good without the title. I'd rather keep it simple, let the kids come because they want to, not because they have to." Everett nodded. "Then we'll back you however we can." Word soon spread beyond the school. A local journalist came by to interview Lamar. He kept it brief, no drama, no spotlight. "I'm just helping them see what's already in them," he said. Sometimes it takes a while to notice. That spring, Eisenberg High held its annual student showcase. Among the science fair entries, art displays, and choir performances, one booth in the gym stood out, Dorsey's Table. It featured handwritten reflections from students about math, life, and confidence. Dozens shared how Lamar helped them believe in themselves not by supplying answers, but by listening and having faith in them. By the end of the night, people had stopped asking, "Is he the janitor?" They were now saying, "That's Mr. Dorsey." He wasn't in a suit. He didn't deliver a speech. He simply stood by the booth, smiled, and thanked every student who stopped by. Later that evening, Back in his apartment, Lamar pulled out his old Purdue sweatshirt from the box under his bed. He didn't wear it, he folded it neatly, placed it into a new storage container, and added a folder filled with student thank you notes beside it. Legacy, he realized, isn't about titles. It's about the mark you leave in others. He didn't need to finish school to make a difference. He didn't need a degree to lead. He only needed to show up and care every single day. And that's exactly what he intended to keep doing. Thanks for taking time to hear Lamar's story. If it touched you, if it reminded you of someone who lifted you up, or someone you may have overlooked, share it. Because sometimes the brightest minds are hiding in the quietest corners.